Hey Margot, how are you?
Hello, so good. Thank you for having me.
It's such a pleasure to have you on the podcast. This is the first podcast that I'm doing since the Christmas break, so I'm really excited to sit down with you to talk about Juno, talk about everything that you've done with the app and also the community. Um, it's such a big problem, but I know we'll get into that later in the podcast. So I can't wait to speak with you. I think it is a very very good podcast to come back with in 2022. So I guess let's just jump into it. I guess introduce yourself to the audience because I'd love to kind of jump into it.
Absolutely. So, my name is Margot. I'm one of the two co founders of Juno. I am 24 years old, which I feel like is relevant for this podcast somehow. And I am half French, half German. Um, and I started Juno, which is a financial education platform for women and non binary people. What that means in reality is basically a Duolingo of money. So it's a platform that teaches you how to invest, how to learn about crypto, how to learn how to get a mortgage, how to manage your pension, etc. And we have a large community following backing us as well.
That's so cool. I'd love to jump into the problem first because, as I mentioned to you before we hit record, but I was at this pitching competition a few months ago, and this other app, I can't remember their name actually, off my head, but they were pitching. They didn't win the competition, but they were pitching, and they were talking about this very exact problem of
Hmm.
financial education, but specifically to females and non-binary people.
Yeah.
And it really opened my eyes. I didn't know how big of an issue it really was. I knew there was some sort of a gap there, but with numbers backing it and with personal experiences, it really solidified to me that there's a huge problem here. And I think you
Hmm.
being in that space, like, how big is it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting because we've been hearing a lot about the gender pay gap over the last few decades, and rightly so because it is a huge problem. I think in the UK, it's for every pound a man earns, a woman earns 82p. So that is definitely a problem. But what hasn't been spoken about enough is the gender wealth gap. So how much women actually own compared to men. So not only earn, but how much do they have at the end of the day? And the gap is so much wider when you look at that. So for every £1 a man owns, a woman just owns 32p. So less than a third of what a man owns. And there's obviously a lot of factors that come into this that explain that gap. There's kind of structural inequalities, but then there's also the problem of financial education and the financial confidence that we have to take the right decisions for ourselves. Things like investing in the stock market, taking out a mortgage, but also not getting into credit, or
Mm.
really being mindful with our spending. We're really noticing differences in financial confidence and hence financial outcomes for the two demographics. And it's a huge problem,
Mm.
especially in the UK.
Mm. So why does that problem exist, do you think?
I think, I mean, there's a lot of different factors. I think it's also the legacy of just very traditional gender roles when it comes to money.
Yeah.
It's only been like 60 years that women could open a bank account in their own name, and so obviously things take time to change. And there's a really interesting study actually created by Starling Bank. It's called "Make My Money Equal," and they kind of looked at the language that is used around finance for both men and women. And what they found is that 95% of finance articles targeted at men focus on investing, on growing
Mm.
their wealth, this idea of abundance and bringing more money in.
Mm.
And then when they looked at the finance articles targeted at women, 87% of those focused on savings, on coupon, on budgeting, and this idea of scarcity, of making sure that the resources, you can keep them more, you can see them.
Yeah.
And of course, that hinders you from actually growing your wealth. And I think that messaging is still so prevalent these days, that I think that plays a huge role in how we feel
Mm.
and how how we perceive ourselves when it comes to money. This idea that I'm not good with money is something that so many of us hold, but it's actually, when have you been taught about money? When have you learned
Mm.
about money? If you haven't tried it, of course you're not good at it yet. It's like saying,
Mm.
I'm not good at yoga when you've never done a class. That makes sense. You haven't had anyone teach it to you
Yeah.
properly. Um,
Mm.
yeah.
That is so interesting. So I know for a fact, obviously, that the education around investing and stuff like that is doesn't exist within schools and stuff. Like, it just doesn't exist. And I've spoken about that on the podcast before because there needs to be that education there. But
yeah,
I guess what I'm really interested in is, of course, the language, as you mentioned, differs when because they're targeting it specifically towards men in later life.
yeah.
So do women basically just get left behind at that point?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's this idea of you need to be careful with your money and you need to take less risk, which is something that gets kind of drummed into us from an early age. And then we say women are more risk averse, but really it's what we've been conditioned to believe from an early age.
Mm,
Then I think what plays another big role is that when you look at fintech overall, the reality is that most of it has been created by men based on men's experiences because most of the fintech teams are men, and so
yeah,
they just don't take enough into account what women's experiences are with financial product. There's a real lack of data. And there's a really interesting book called Invisible Woman that kind of explores the data gap in different fields. And they see that, for example, in the healthcare industry, so many of the kind of healthcare trial have been done on male
yeah.
bodies. And so there's
I know about
huge
that.
amounts of
Yeah,
missing
it's
data for
crazy.
women. And I think the same applies for finance. All these fintech companies are run by men, and so obviously they don't take into account as much the need of the other demographic.
Mm, that is really really interesting. I think education probably only makes up a very a small chunk of the overall system because as you were mentioning, it is the people in charge of these organizations, which is like a big part of
Yeah,
it. But obviously, education is the bit that you're is the angle that you're going in with
yeah,
with Juno. So I guess how important is the education in this overall piece, and have like I guess like is that that's why you started, right?
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think there's huge structural problem that need to change, and we see education as a way of taking the power back into our own hands and kind of increasing the rate of that change. Because if we're just
Mm,
going to sit around and wait until the system changes, we might still be here for a while without anything changing. And so
yeah.
I think the education piece and the confidence piece are tied in really closely together. Because once you feel like those words that are so jargony and that you don't understand and that you shy away from previously, once you have a grasp of what an ETF is, what an NFT is, what a fund is, then suddenly you feel like you're included in the conversation and you feel like you have agency over what's happening with your finances because it's not this kind of black, dreadful box that you don't want to look into. And so I think that's where the role of education really lies in making people realize that finance is not this rocket science that we've been made to believe. Even
Mm,
investing, even crypto, most of us can understand it if it's explained in an
yeah.
interesting and proper way.
Hmm.
And that's what we're really determined to show people.
No, it's 100% right. Like I'm moving into a new role, which I haven't actually announced yet, but I'm moving into a new role with this NFT marketplace platform. I'm going to be like with the head of growth there, and it's
Yeah,
like the team is majority male,
yeah,
um, not because there are some females obviously involved, but
yeah,
not because like they haven't tried to find females, but a lot of them just don't touch the space, and I think it's like what you were talking about. It things that I guess they might shy away from because it is culturally seen, these sort of spaces, it's seen as a male thing. When actual fact, like I know for a fact because I know NFTs, it's not difficult. Like you can
yeah,
explain it easily to everyone. It's not like it can be inclusive to everyone. Anyone can
yeah,
get involved. It doesn't matter.
yeah,
I mean, a big reason why I started this very podcast is like a similar thing, right? Because a lot of females get left behind when it comes to other sort of educational podcasts that
yeah,
specifically speak about entrepreneurship. Like we were saying
yeah,
before, a lot of them give a platform to like middle-aged white men, and it's like
yeah,
I want to be a podcast where to show relatable stories from everyone to show that it can be for everyone entrepreneurship and
yeah,
so I completely understand what you're trying to say. Um, I'm just like trying to take a step back to hear, like, I guess like other people in the audience might say,
yeah,
I don't believe this, by the way, but I know like people might say this is like,
yeah.
I guess why do you need to differentiate the language between males and
Mhm,
females and like other genders? Because
mhm.
education is education at the end of the day. Why do you need to differentiate it?
Yeah, I think there's a few things here. I think the reality is that women face different financial circumstances throughout their lives. So, obviously, the gender pay gap, but also the higher likelihood of being a sole earner, the motherhood penalty, the smaller pensions. There's a lot of things that we face that simply just by the structure that we live in are different.
Mhm.
Um, and then I think being intentional in terms of because it's a space that hasn't been created for us in the long run. I think a lot of us have negative experiences in feeling shamed or in feeling like we don't belong in those types of spaces. And so, what we're really interested in is creating intentionally a safe space for those that have been left out of the conversation to feel like they're part of it. I think have a huge role to play in this as well, and being allies and being part of that conversation together. I think we can all benefit from learning, absolutely. But I think for us, it's really about bridging that gender wealth
Mm,
gap that needs to happen. And we see financial education as a way of getting there.
mm.
But I absolutely agree with your point. I think financial education overall is something that gets completely left out of schools and should absolutely be on the curriculum for everyone. We just don't feel like we can kind of solve every problem, tackle it all
Yeah.
at once, and we feel passionate about this one.
Yeah, no, for
Yeah.
sure. So let's talk about that. I guess like Juno started out because of that problem, because you wanted to give education to, that those groups, like women and non-binary people.
Yeah.
So I guess how did it actually fundamentally start?
Yeah, so I was running a previous business before this, which was kind of running in-person events. And obviously during the pandemic, that became a little bit less popular. And my sister reached out to me, and she always has crazy entrepreneurship ideas. And she said, I think we should do a course on finance. So many people want to learn about it. And so we started a 12-week course simply over email for our friends. We really noticed that there were so many things people didn't know about. So we thought, let's just, send a PDF every week and see
Mm,
where we get to. And within a couple of days, we had about 500 people signed up. And it just was
wow.
kind of spreading around through word of mouth. And we realized there was a huge appetite for this like older sister kind of financial advice, which isn't a bank sponsoring it or, which isn't a sales pitch for a sort of product, purely in your own best interest. Here's the information you need to know.
Mm,
Um, and so after this 12 weeks course, the results we saw were remarkable in terms of actually taking action. We saw so many people making their first investment, getting out of debt, building their emergency fund. Someone left like a financially abusive relationship. It was just amazing how that 12-week course really had a big impact.
mm,
And then we
that's
thought of
amazing.
ways we can optimize the learning experience because edtech is such a booming field at the moment, and there's so many different platforms that spend um, all their focus on the user experience and making the learning experience as engaging and as accountable as possible.
Yeah.
And so we thought, let's take those learnings and see what we can do with finance.
Mm.
And that's how the app kind of got started.
That's amazing. We'll go on to the app in a second, but what I'm really interested in is, well, firstly, building a community is the, I'd say, probably the hardest thing about growing a startup, right? Like you can build amazing products, you can build, all of that stuff, but building an actual community that loves what you're doing, that's
Mhm,
fundamentally really, really tricky. And that, like obviously that's why a lot of startups fail, right? Um,
mhm.
so, but you built that email, the email course, but it got to like 500 users. How did that happen?
I'd say a few things. I think we're incredibly mission driven, and that resonates. I think the timing is right. There's a big appetite for it, especially during the pandemic. The whole GameStop thing was happening. No one really had any
Yeah.
idea what that meant, and so we kind of slipped in right at the good moment. But then back to your previous point about making it only for women and non-binary people, I think by being very focused in terms of who this is for, it meant that yes, we don't appeal to everyone, but the people that we do appeal to tend to resonate quite strongly with our mission. And so it happened quite naturally, I would say. I mean, those 500 people, we shared a type form around on our social media, and then it just ended up being shared around into other networks, etc. So word of mouth kind of carried that, and I think it's something we found so far. We now have 10,000 users on the app, and it's all been word of mouth and organic reach.
Mm,
Um, so I think the mission driven nature is really just what gets
mm.
people going.
I guess like I know word of mouth can be incredibly powerful, and
Yeah.
it's like we've grown a lot from word of mouth as well, but I'd love to know how you can kind of optimize word of mouth. That's kind of like what I'm going through at the moment is like I know
Mm,
word of mouth exists, I know it delivers results for us. How do we do more? How do we get like more results out of word of mouth, because
yeah,
it's so effective?
yeah. It's tricky because it's not like a controllable channel. You can't
Yeah.
like increase spend and then see the
Yeah,
results coming
exactly,
out
exactly.
directly. I think a few things we've thought about is, how do we make people want to share about this? How do we get them to feel interested in it? And I think for us, a big role in that is, we're not a company. We're not positioning ourselves as like the face of this brand, but we're just initially two sisters who are passionate about changing a problem in the world. And we need the help of others to get there. And I think appealing to that and really showing the ups and downs and the struggles and asking for that help directly as well has really, I think, supported us
Mm.
in people spreading the word, because it's not like this tech startup that you don't really
Yeah.
know what's behind it. It's like, oh wait, I want to be part of this. I want to
Yeah.
help because I believe in this mission too. And so I think what I would encourage any person starting a brand as well is, be the face behind it, be the real person behind it, and people get much more attached to emotions and to people rather than to brands. And I think that helps a lot, to build that relationship directly with your community.
No, it is a really, really cool point that you make there. And it reminded me of this kind of like segment of a book that I read. It's like kind of shifting my whole perspective on startups before, because I know a lot of people when they start something, they kind of think that their startup's kind of like the hero in the story of
Mm,
like everyone, better goes to them. But it's kind of like, in actual fact, if you shift your focus, your user is the hero and
yeah,
you're actually the tool or the friendly person or, company that helps them get to that goal that they want to go to. And it's
absolutely.
when you actually change your focus in that way, it
Mm,
really changes the way that you run a startup. And it's kind of like
yeah,
changed the way that I'm running Wing as well at the moment.
for sure.
um, and it's really cool that you're saying like that's the way that you went into it from the beginning, and that's how word of mouth, I guess, has been optimized. It's kind of
Yeah.
like, you know what, we can like, because everyone else feels really involved in your journey, right?
Mhm.
I don't really understand startups, especially small ones that don't show founders faces and stuff like that. They're
Yeah,
really missing a trick, right?
for
Because
sure.
if you're trying to build a community and you don't actually show your faces, it's like they can't disassociate. They can't associate a company with an actual founder, and they can't.
Yeah,
I feel like people can't get behind it as much.
for
um
sure. And everyone loves those stories. I mean, if I think about my friends who are entrepreneurs, I do anything to help them because I'm
yeah.
like, you can see the passion in their eyes, and no matter if I don't even believe in their mission, I'll be there supporting them.
Mm,
Um, and I think that really is infectious.
mm.
So yeah,
So
tell
if
me.
you combine that with like a good mission, a good sort of good value that you're bringing to that user
Hmm.
or customer, then yeah, I guess word of mouth can be massively optimized, right?
Mm,
And that's kind of like what you found. So when you were
yeah.
saying word of mouth, was it literally just people sharing the type form, or was it when you were saying those emails, then people would share the emails with their friends?
Yeah, so initially it was the type form, and then we quickly created a Slack channel,
Mm.
where people could kind of add each other to it, and then the app obviously now, is easy to share as well.
So you got to the point, like how big did that original community get before you started the app?
So we raised a pre-seed round of funding very quickly after those 12 weeks. The 12 weeks hadn't really finished, when we finished the
Wow.
pre-seed. So we didn't raise a huge amount. We raised 230,000 pounds then, which gave us the resources to build the app, because both me and my co-founder, my sister, are non-technical. So there was no way we were going to build the app ourselves. And so that pre-seed really supported, the next
Mm.
phase.
Wait, let's talk about that for a second. We might run out of time, but I'm not sure. I think this is really interesting though. So, for anyone that's like wanting to raise money, I'm kind of going through it at the
Yeah,
moment with Wing. It's like you managed to raise some money, like
yeah.
230,000. You said that's like pretty substantial, in that moment of time, just based on that initial community that you built from that email list.
Yeah, it was a deck. I'd learned a bit of Figma, so I designed a prototype on Figma, which, looking back, is just the most horrendous thing you've ever seen. But we had a prototype of the app, um, and we had the appetite of that initial community, and I think with our drivenness, I think that's how you say
Yeah.
it. um, yeah, I think that made quite a strong case.
Mm.
Um,
So you built a pitch deck, and obviously you built like a Figma prototype
yeah.
of how the app would look like. And you didn't say how big the community was back then. It was probably like a couple thousand, something like that. Something like
Not not even. It was like, yeah, maybe 1,000,
that.
1,500.
That's crazy. And then you went to some angel investors and you wanted to
Yeah.
get funding to build something to basically grow this community even more, but on an app.
Yeah, exactly. So we quickly realized that, yeah, as I said, the learning experience would be 10 times better if we can really bring it in app. And we had a lot of references of what kind of models we wanted to build. I think FinTok has exploded over the last few years as well, and a few months specifically. So really taking in the models of video learning, bite-sized learning, and bringing that into our own app. And that happened pretty quickly. We completed it with friends and family. When knocking on every door we could to complete the round, and then launched the app 6 months after that.
Mm.
So launched it in early November.
So how did you get that initial investment? Who you kind of like reaching out to?
So the lead investor was someone who was mentoring us before that, and I think something that I love as a piece of um, something somebody once said to me is like, ask for money and you'll get advice, ask for advice and you'll get money. And I think that's been very true in our journey. Whenever there's mentors and I ask for advice, they often offer to invest. And if I'm wanting them to actually give us money, they'll just give me advice and that's it.
Yeah.
So I think cultivating that relationship with people over a long run, he wanted to invest and he brought in another business angel. And then we found a couple of other smaller tickets as well
Mm.
around ourselves.
That's
Yeah.
phenomenal. So why did you decide to build an app and not something else? You know, we spoke about this before we hit record, but
Yeah.
obviously you had that community there. Um, and like you can pretty much do whatever you want with a community. There's loads of different ways that you can go down with it to expand. And of course, like we had Stephanie Sword Williams on the podcast before, and she built a huge community around female empowerment and stuff like that. But she decided to write a book about it and then do some like workshops with big corporates and stuff like that. So I guess why did you decide to go down the app route?
Yeah, I think for us, we saw that there was a value proposition that hadn't been tapped into, which is offering personalized financial education accessible at scale. So at the moment, how people can learn about finance is through books, through podcasts. But the problem is your financial situation is so different from mine. You might have 10,000 in savings and be looking at investing in crypto. I might be deep in debt and needing to figure out how I get out of debt and build up my emergency fund.
Yeah.
If we read the same book, I'm only going to get value out of two chapters, and you'll only get value out of two chapters.
Mm.
When actually, what would have been interesting for you is if you had really that personalized curriculum that gets to know you, your situation, and then it's like, okay, so you want to invest in crypto? Have you thought about these things? Blah, blah, blah.
Mm.
And we felt like that wasn't possible through the traditional non tech channels. So we felt like it had to be tech. And then our target audience is young people, so Gen Z and millennials who are mainly on their phone. We also wanted the learning experience to be kind of quick and engaging and snappy, and so
Mm.
we very quickly decided on an app rather than a web platform. Um,
Mm.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's kind
makes a lot of sense. So
of it.
I guess like with that money you built the app, I guess you must have outsourced it to a company, something like that, when you built the app more practically.
No, so we hired a
Or
UX
you
designer.
hired, okay, yeah,
Yeah,
cool.
yeah,
Okay, so you
right.
hired someone, you built it, and then I guess when you launched, I guess how did you launch firstly, and then how has it kind of grown organically to, I think you said 10,000 users, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, I guess like how's that all happened?
God, it's been a bit of a whirlwind the last few months, I must say. So we've been cultivating the community before launch in our Slack, and we had about like 600 people in the Slack channel before the launch. So not huge, cultivating the kind of Instagram audience, etc. We had a mailing list of about 1,200 people, um, and we'd set ourselves the goal of having 1,000 users within the first month of the app launching.
Mm.
Um, and then, luckily enough, we got some great press coverage. We got like a headline in Sifted about what we're doing and loads of other press. Um, and we reached 1,000 users within like 22 hours. Just
Oh
like,
my
what the
gosh.
fuck? How is this possible? And then it just kept growing. And people are loving it and referring the app. The App Store put us on like the trending apps for quite a while, which again drove a lot of downloads. We got a heaps more press. Yeah, it's been pretty wild. I
Wow.
think we kind of tapped into real, a real nugget of appetite there.
Mm.
Yeah.
So that, like, all that press coverage as well, like, did you reach out to them? Like, how did you get that?
I think we got that piece of advice early on saying it's so worth investing in press, and I would
Mm.
say 100%. So
Yeah.
we got a PR advisor very early. She was part of the founding team of Starling Bank, the director of a PR agency. She's incredible. And so she's been mentoring us for months now. We had no idea how PR works. And then we hired a PR freelance person 1 day a week, um, who jumped in and just covered and sent out a lot of different press releases.
Mm.
And it's been the best possible investment we've ever made, because then we just raised a seed round off the back of that press. And yeah, it was just exactly what we needed at that time.
I guess how valuable is press for, like, I guess in terms of, I guess, numbers, like how valuable has it been?
I think it's difficult to put a real count on it, because you don't get, like, we didn't have a specific tracking link or anything
Mm.
like that. But obviously, Sifted is huge with VCs, and so it meant that we basically had an inbox full of inbounds from VCs, who were interested in investing in Juno, and so I mean, it was pretty valuable.
Wow.
Yeah, it was great. But the thing is, it's hard to predict. Again, like, it's not a and that's we say a lot to our friends as well. It's not a given. It's not because you have a PR person that they'll nail and be
Mm.
able to get you a spot in a great magazine or anything. So I think we just got lucky.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it is a case. We haven't really touched PR at all for my business, and it's something that I've definitely seen small value of, because I wrote a blog, and I mentioned Wing in like one paragraph of the overall
Mm.
blog, and that one paragraph got, like, I think it got us like 10 or like 20 sales, something like that. It was pretty crazy,
Wow.
just from like one paragraph, like tiny
Yeah.
paragraph. So I'm like, if that's got the result for that, then obviously press must be huge, because there'll be more readers, and it'll be a article dedicated to it. So
Yeah.
I that's why it's kind of shifted my focus. I'm like, we should definitely focus on press now. This
Yeah.
seems very important to do.
Yeah.
um so
I think also for credibility, just because
yeah,
we are
yeah.
also in, like, the financial space,
Mm.
having the backing of, like, press also shows that we're a legit company, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah, that's another thing that I wanted to focus on because of press. It's not just in terms of sales, but also if you go to an investor who's like, "Oh, I've been featured in Sifted," it
Yeah.
provides a lot of credibility, and also
Yeah.
for people that wouldn't have downloaded your app before, now they see you on Sifted. It's like that element of trust, isn't it?
Yeah.
So yeah, 100% agree with you. I guess what is next for Juno? Now that you've got 10,000 users onto the platform,
Yeah.
what's the kind of like next step?
Absolutely. So we are rolling out a lot more content. We've really launched with, like, a baby MVP, given what we're wanting to build. So at the moment, there's very minimal content on the app, and we're launching the investing module this month. We're launching the crypto module, all the cool modules. Launching the community and app as well. So really rolling
Mm.
out that side of things, and we're really aiming to become the financial hub for women, and non-binary people, and then in the future integrating with financial providers as well. So you can do both the learning and the tracking and the doing within the app.
That's very
Um,
cool.
so that's next.
That's so cool. Yeah, that sounds amazing. I know a lot of people on this podcast would love to, check out Juno, like stay in touch with you. I guess, like, how's the best way for them to stay up? Because given that we should probably wrap up the podcast now, I guess
Yeah.
how's the best way for them to stay in touch with you?
You can find Juno on the App Store. It's still free for a couple of weeks. It's called Your Juno, and then we're on Instagram at Your Juno. You can find me on LinkedIn, Margot de Broglie. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Okay, sweet. Thank you so much, Margot, for coming on the podcast again. The first
Thank you.
episode of 2022. And yeah, I can't wait to see what Juno does this year. I think it's going to be a big year, given what you said. And also, like, yeah, I know a lot of people are interested. So I can't wait. Thank you again so much. And I'm sure we'll speak soon. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.